Hey, freedom lovers, it's William Moore, and you are watching Beyond the Ties That Bind. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the program. I hope everyone is having as good of a day as you can possibly have, living under the shadow of tyranny, oppression, and despotism that the federal government now cast upon the country. Real quick, want to address something. I did say I was going to make a commitment to try and not use so many colorful metaphors, which I did in the last video. Now, I didn't promise you would never hear the BS bomb, but I was reminded of that commitment, and right now, I'm angry. I'm pissed off at the direction the country's going in, and you should be pissed off too, enough not to worry about the language I'm using. Okay, that said, the government is at war with the public. This is war. They have declared war against the public. They are opening fire with their little plastic and rubber bullets. They are using tear gas on people, beating people up with PR-24s. We are seeing the collapse of our country. The foundation is crumbling underneath us. We're going to see the supply chain completely broke to where in 2 months' time, you're not going to see any food on the shelves of any grocery store in the country. And that's what they want. They want martial law, and they want you to have to go to them and beg bread. They're going to use these protests as an opportunity to lock this country down so tight. They will not let any crisis go to waste. And they're going to use this. They have probably created this crisis. Now you have provocateurs on both sides. You have peaceful protests going on, but then you have plants within the peaceful protest that are committing acts of violence. And then you have people within the government, the alphabet agencies of the government, who are going around knocking out windows, starting fires, blowing up vehicles, planning vehicles to where protesters light them on fire, toss them over, turn them over, and vandalize them. So the government, you have provocateurs on both sides. And then when the violent people act up within the midst of the protesters, mainly peaceful protesters, then that gives an excuse to the jackbooted thugs to attack everyone. And that's what's going on. And we have war. And a lot of people say, well, isn't that unconstitutional? No, that's exactly what the Constitution provides for. The Constitution is working as it's supposed to work. The Constitution is a tyrannical document. Hear me out. The Constitution was drafted in 1787 by a group of psychopaths. 55 men got together, one left. And then 39 people signed it, all bankers and attorneys. And they gave themselves the power to govern the country. They were looking out for their own economic interest. Now, what was going on at the time, you had a lot of tax revolts and rebellions taking place. One in particular, Shays' Rebellion. But people were revolting against the oppressive taxes which were taking place back then. I'm not talking about taxes that were being enacted by Great Britain. No, I'm talking about after the country had gained its independence, the Continental Congress was imposing taxes upon people that they could not pay, land taxes. And then when they couldn't pay these taxes, the federal government, or well, the state governments would seize those lands, confiscate those lands. So people would revolt. So these people got, Washington, Madison, Hamilton, they all got together and they said, hey, we need to do something to give ourselves power so that we can suppress any further insurrection, so that we can tax these people. We need to write some laws. So they drafted the Constitution, which created a strong central government, which had power over the Constitution. Your Bill of Rights, that didn't even come around until 2 years later, 1789. And it was only due to compromise, because they were scared of men like Patrick Henry, George Mason, Richard Henry Lee, Samuel Adams, and Thomas Paine. They were very scared of the intellect of Patrick Henry, but they were very, very scared of the violent tendencies of one Samuel Adams. So, the Bill of Rights It was drafted by James Madison, but he made sure that those amendments did not go against anything contained within the articles, sections, and clauses of the Constitution. He made sure of that because George Washington stated in his inaugural speech that the Bill of Rights, the amendments within the Bill of Rights, should not be strong enough to take any power away from the federal government, should not be able to soften the power of that central government. Freedom is under attack right now because the federal government is at war with you and I. We are the domestic enemy. When those jackbooted thugs swear an oath to the Constitution to protect the Constitution, defend it from enemies, foreign and domestic, we're the domestic enemies, you and I. Because it's all about the government. That document's all about the government. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, they have the power to lay and collect taxes. They have the power to pay the debt, provide for the general welfare, provide for common defense. And then it goes on in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, they have the power to call forth, raise up a militia, to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrection, such as those tax revolts and such as what's going on right now, and repel invasions. That makes you and I the domestic enemy, not some tyrannical leader. No, the government protects anybody within government. The Constitution protects anyone within government. Lysander Spooner stated that the Constitution has either authorized the government we have had or has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it's unfit to exist. I know for a fact that the Constitution has authorized the government we have had. That tyrannical, despotic government that runs roughshod over every individual out there, that destroys freedom. And that's what we all want. And that's what we all need. Freedom. Freedom levels the playing field. Freedom gives everyone an opportunity to partake of wealth. But they don't want that. They want a class system. And they want to destroy the middle class completely and have two classes. That's how oligarchy works. You have an upper class, you have the oligarchs, then you have the serfs. And that's exactly what they want, and that's what they're taking us to. We've already been debt slaves. The Federal Reserve, the banking cartel, which has controlled the nation since pretty much the 1930s, its inception in 1913, but it came into full power in 1930s. Through the federal government, they control everyone. But it goes back even further than that, to the drafting of the U.S. Constitution, which gave a small group of psychopaths the power to govern, to control a population. It's not a freedom document. It does not defend individual freedom. It does not restrain government. It does the opposite. It allows government to grow as large as it needs and wants. And it restrains individual freedoms. And freedom is a gift from our Creator. And that's what we all want. And that's what we all should desire. Freedom. And now freedom does not give a license to be violent. No. The heart of freedom was eloquently stated by the Master 2,000 years ago. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then vice versa, don't do unto others, or not vice versa, but the reverse. Don't do unto others as you would not want them doing unto you. Do no harm. No one has a higher claim to your life and property than you. And that's what we all need to realize. Because with the existence of government, then someone does have a higher claim to your life and property than you. Any entity that has the power to tax is stating that they have a higher claim to your life and property than you. Especially when they can enforce those taxes at the end of a gun. especially when they can enforce those laws at the end of a gun. And then in Article 1, Section 8, the last clause of Section 8, it says that they can make any law proper and necessary for the carrying forth of the foregoing powers of the Constitution. Anything that they need to do, and then they write these laws. A legislator scribbles something down on a piece of paper, and the entire legislature says it's law. And then the more laws they make, the more criminals they create. And the more laws they make, the more we are oppressed. Because each law has a fine, has a penalty attached to it. And that's how they loot us. They loot us through taxation, they loot us through fines. And then they make laws that, oh, you need permission to fish. You need permission to get married. And you have to pay fees for this. You have to have permission to hunt. You have to have permission to own a weapon. And they don't want you owning a weapon, and they're going to use this event right now as a pretext to confiscate weapons. And when you don't have the right to own a weapon, which you do have the right, but when someone tries to take away that right and someone seizes your means of self-defense, then they will carry out genocide. Then you are truly their victim. Right now we have a lot of people that are victims of jackbooted thugs all across the country. Why? Because of government. If government did not exist, you would not have this taking place right now. I'm going to show you a video. You've got the police departments from coast to coast being militarized. They've got armored vehicles. They have tactical gear that they wear that you only wear in wartime. Patrick Henry made the most passionate defense of freedom ever, and he gave a speech to the Virginia Ratifying Convention, and he spoke against the adoption of the Constitution because he smelled within that document the stench of tyranny. And that's what we have because that document was adopted, because that document exists today, and it gives this government unlimited power. And people have been brainwashed to worship this document, and this document is nothing more than a piece of shit. Patrick Henry loved us enough to fight for our freedom. Now it's our opportunity, each individual, to fight for your freedom. We need to first educate ourselves on the Constitution and see that it is a tyrannical document, and see that government and the bureaucracies that exist within government and around government are all tyrannical. And then we need to, as a country, march into Washington and tell Congress, your services were never appreciated, and we are not thankful for them, and they are not needed anymore and never were needed. But we're taking our freedom back. Each one of us has to get as passionate for our freedom right now as Patrick Henry was for our freedom back in 1789, when he stated that that document reeked of despotism. And that's the despotism we see right now all across this country. And it's because of that worthless piece of paper that gives these men a monopoly on violence, a monopoly to run roughshod over anyone who gets in their way. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing people being opened up on with these bullets, kids being exposed to tear gas, kids being shot in the eye with these bullets that take their eyes out. You have cops beating people with PR-24s. People say that's not constitutional. Yes, it is. They're doing exactly what the Constitution states, because the Constitution states that they have the power to create any law necessary and proper to carry out their agenda. They gave themselves the power to tax, and that there is oppression and tyranny, because they They enforce those taxes at the end of a gun and always have and always will. They want to take from you your life's blood. It's time to say, I want what my Creator gave me, and that's the ability to choose how I live my life. These jackbooted thugs that come down the street, marching down the street, and open fire on these people, give them an order to get back inside their house like they own the earth. No. And the one who does own the earth, if you jackbooted thugs don't change your ways, he's going to come and he's going to crush you to powder. This is going to turn into a civil war if cooler heads do not prevail. People need to step back, educate themselves, and tell the government, I want my freedom. And have that same passionate love for freedom that Patrick Henry had. We're going to take a look at this video, and then I'm going to read from that speech Patrick Henry gave to the Virginia Ratifying Convention, and where he rejected that piece of paper like everyone who loves freedom should. Because if you don't reject it, then you're giving your permission, you're giving your consent to these men to walk all over you. It's time to say enough is enough. Because the Constitution gives these jackbooted thugs the right to put their knee on your throat, to push you around. You're the domestic enemy. I'm the domestic enemy. And they're protecting their government from domestic enemies. That's the power the Constitution gave them. Study the Constitution. I'm not talking about the amendments, even though those were drafted in a way that they would not contradict the articles, sections, and clauses. Go and read the articles, sections, and clauses and look at the power these 39 men gave themselves over you. And where it says we the people, that's talking about the body politic. That's not talking about you and I. These lawyers were wise. They were crafty. They were shrewd. They didn't care about individual freedom. They only cared about their economic interest. One of the reasons that the revolution, that wasn't a revolution, War for Independence took place, and you can look this up, is the East India Company. And if you look that up, they had a monopoly on importing and exporting. And it was costing men like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Ben Franklin, all of these men, even Samuel Adams, a great amount of money. And it was owned, the East India Company was owned by the Crown. These men were protecting their own economic interest, even in the War for Independence. People need to educate themselves about this country's history. And you'll see that even back then, it protected an oligarchy, aristocrats. They came out of the Constitutional Convention with slavery still in existence. How is that a freedom document? So anyway, let's look at how these jackbooted thugs treat individuals in the country today.
Oh, there's more. Look at this. They just keep coming.
Oh, go inside! Get inside! Get inside! Get inside! Get in your house now! Let's go! Light him up! Go inside now! Get in the house!
Get in, get in, get in, get in, get in, get in. Get in.
Oh, God, that hurt. You good?
Are you okay?
Right on the fucking crotch.
Are you okay? You got hit?
I'm good. They're...
Did you hear the jackbooted thug? I'm going to play that again. Let's go back It takes place right about here.
Light him up! Go inside now!
Light him up.
Jesus fucking
Get in, get in, get in, get in, get in, get in. Get in.
Oh, God, that hurt. You
Are
guys.
you okay?
Right on the fucking crotch.
So, there you had jackbooted thugs. I mean, these people, that is depraved indifference, like Jimmy Dore was stating today when he was showing a video of New York cops driving through an intersection where there were people in the intersection, actually just driving through these people. They're just order followers. They don't care what the orders are. And then you have people who sit at home and watch this and actually think that their authority, their badges, the fact that they work for the government, which is a fictional entity, gives them the power to do this. Gives them the right to injure people. That is against the very principle of freedom. Patrick Henry stated in his speech, passionate speech in defense of freedom, "A standing army we shall have also to execute the execrable commands of tyranny. And how are you to punish them? Will you order them to be punished? Who shall obey these orders? Will your mace bearer be a match for a disciplined regimen? In what situation are we to be? The clause before you gives a power of direct taxation, unbounded and unlimited, exclusive power of legislation in all cases whatsoever, for 10 miles square, and over all places purchased for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, etc. What resistance could be made? The attempt would be madness. You will find all the strength of this country in the hands of your enemies. Their garrisons will naturally be the strongest places in the country. Your militia is given up to Congress. Also, in another part of this plan, talking of the Constitution, they will therefore act as they think proper. All power will be in their own possession. You cannot force them to receive their punishment. Of what service would a militia be to you when most probably you will not have a single musket in the state? For as arms are to be provided by Congress, they may or may not furnish them." And this is exactly true. You see, the military, with much might. Now he's talking about the states not having the power to fight against the federal government. But the federal government now controls the state national guards and controls the state police forces to the point to where I've actually heard police officers state that the president is the one with exclusive authority over the country. And then you have Donald Trump stating that he has absolute power, which Patrick Henry even talks about that, saying that if your chief man be a man of ambition, that he will seek absolute power. But then Patrick Henry goes on to state, he says, "Our situation will be deplorable indeed, nor can we ever expect to get this government amended, since I have already shown that a very small minority may prevent it, and that small minority interested in the continuance of the oppression. Will the oppressor let go of the oppressed? Was there ever an instance? Can the annals of mankind exhibit one single example where rulers overcharged with power willingly let go the oppressed, though solicited and requested most earnestly?" And that's what we have in the country right now. People are soliciting and requesting most earnestly that you stop oppressing us. But Patrick Henry knew that they would not let go, that they would continue the oppression. He spoke in defense of your freedom. You owe it to yourself to now stand up for your own freedom, as he did for all of ours. In the opening of Patrick Henry's speech to the Virginia Ratifying Convention, he stated this: "I trust there are many who think my professions for the public good to be real. Let your suspicion look to both sides. There are many on the other side who possibly may have been persuaded to the necessity of these measures, which I conceive to be dangerous to your liberty," or freedom. "Guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. Unfortunately, nothing will preserve it but downright force. Whenever you give up that force, you are inevitably ruined." Now, force does not require violence. Force just requires a show of strength. That's why everyone needs to get passionate about freedom, as passionate as this great man was. And tell the government enough is enough before we're begging the government for bread. It's the Hegelian dialect. Problem, reaction, solution. The government creates a problem, the people react, then the government presents a solution. And that solution is always the sacrifice of freedom and more control to the government, more reliance and dependence upon the government. And that's what we cannot have. Because that government, it's the same government that killed George Floyd, that kills white people. That's not being talked about right now. But the police kill white people too. They kill anyone who defies the government, who breaks one of those laws scribbled down on a piece of paper. And many times there is no crime involved because a crime requires an injured party. And you cannot injure the government because it is a fiction. People, it's time to stand up and take back what is yours, what the Creator gave you, and that is freedom and the right to live your life as you see fit without harming anyone else. We're seeing people being hurt. The same government that killed George Floyd, that kills other people, that takes from you your very livelihood, that is causing people to commit suicide because they're in despair because they crashed the economy, that the same government that's starving children here in America and in other places in the world because America provided food for those countries, that same government wants to control you and will destroy you if you get in its way. This is why we all need to band together and cast off the chains of government and oppression. We have the right. It's been given to us from our Creator. And right now, this government is the enemy of humanity and humanity's Creator. Think about it. It's time. It's time we honor the one who created us by taking back the life he gave us. This is William Moore for Beyond the Ties That Bind. Until next time, may we have peace as much as is possible in this environment of violence which the government has created.